The Antes or Antae were an early Slavic tribal polity which existed in the 6th century Lower Danube and northwestern Black Sea region. They are commonly associated with the archaeological Penkovka culture. First mentioned in 518, the Antes invaded the Diocese of Thrace at some point between 533 and 545. Shortly after, they became Byzantine foederati, and were given gold payments and a fort named Turris, somewhere north of the Danube at a strategically important location, so as to prevent hostile barbarians invading Roman lands. Thus, between 545 and the 580s, Antean soldiers fought in various Byzantine campaigns. The Antes were eventually attacked and destroyed by the Pannonian Avars at the beginning of the 7th century. Historiography, based on the literary evidence provided by Procopius and by Jordanus, the Antes have long been viewed as one of the constituent Proto-Slavic peoples ancestral both to medieval groups and to modern nations. Studying the Antes since the late 18th century, modern scholars have at times engaged in heated polemics regarding Antean origins and the attribution of their ancestors. They have variously regarded the Antes as ancestors of specifically the Vyatichi Rus and of the Ukrainians versus other East Slavs. Additionally, South Slavic historians have regarded the Antes as the ancestors of the East-South Slavicis ethno-linguistic affinities. Although regarded as a predominantly Slavic tribal union, numerous other theories have arisen, especially with regard to the origins of the ruling core, including theories of a Gothic, Iranic and Slavic ruling nobility, or some mixture thereof. Much dispute arose because of scant literary evidence. Little is known apart from the tribal name itself and a handful of anthroponyms. The name Antes itself does not appear to be Slavic, but is often held to be an Iranian word. Pritzik, citing Max Vazma, argues that Anta means frontier end, thus *Antia could mean frontier man. Although the first unequivocal attestation of the tribal Antes in the 6th century AD, scholars have tried to connect the Antes with a tribe rendered in Sai in a 2nd century BC Chinese source. Pliny the Elder mentions some Antae living near the Azov shores, and inscriptions from the Kerch Peninsula dating to the 3rd century AD bear the word Antes, based on documentation of Sarmatian tribes inhabiting the North Pontic region during the early centuries of the Common Era. Presumed Iranian loanwords into Slavic and Sarmatian cultural borrowings into the Penkovka culture. Scholars such as Robert Magasai, Valentin Sedoff and John Fine Jr. maintain earlier proposals by Soviet-era scholars such as Boris Rybakov, that the Antes were originally a Sarmatian Alan frontier tribe which became Slavicized but preserved the name. Bohdan Strauminskij highlights, however, that the etymology of Antes remains unproven and is nevertheless irrelevant. Strauminskij analyzed the personal names of Antean chiefs and offered Germanic etymological alternatives to the commonly accepted Slavic etymology. However, recent perspectives view the tribal entities named by Greco-Roman sources as fluctuant political formations which were, above all, ethnic categorizations based on ethnographic stereotypes rather than first-hand, accurate knowledge of barbarian language or culture. S. Edmonievsky summarizes that the Antes were not a discrete, ethnically homogeneous entity, but rather a highly complex political reality. Linguistically, contemporary evidence suggests that Slavic was widely spoken over a large area by various ethnic, including those Roman provincial, Germanic, and Oghur-rich populations. It has further been proposed that the Sclaveni were not distinguished from others on the basis of language or culture, but the type of the military organization. If compared to the Avars, or 6th century Goths, the Sclaveni were numerous, smaller disunited groups, one of which, the Antae, became foederati constituted by a treaty. History. Hypothetical. According to the Sarmatians Antes link, the Antes were a subgroup of the Alans, which dominated the Black Sea and North Caucasus region during the late Sarmatian period. The Antes were based between the Prut and Lower Dniester during the 1st to 2nd centuries AD. For the 4th century, the center of power shifted northward toward the southern Bug. In the 5th and 6th centuries they settled in Volhynia and subsequently in the Middle Dnieper region near the present-day city of Kiev. As they moved north from the open steppe to the forest steppe, they organized the Slavic tribes, and the name Antes came to be used for the mixed Slavo-Alanic body. Whatever their exact origins is, Jordanus and Procopius appear to suggest that the Antes were Slavic by the 5th century. In describing the lands of Scythia, Jordanus states that the populous race of the Venethi occupy a great expanse of land. Though their names are now dispersed amid various clans and places, yet they are chiefly called Sclaveni and Antes. Later, in describing the deeds of Ermanaric, the mythical Ostrogothic king, he informs that the Venethi have now 3 names: Venethi, Antes and Sclaveni. Finally, Jordanus details a battle between the Antean king Bos and Vinitharius after the latter's subjugation by the Huns. After initially defeating the Goths, the Antes lost the second battle, and Bos and 70 of his leading nobles were crucified. Scholars have traditionally taken the accounts of Jordanus at face value as evidence that Sclaveni and Antes descended from the Venedi, a tribe known to historians such as Tacitus, Ptolemy and Pliny the Elder since the 2nd century AD. However, the utility of Jetka as an accurate ethnographic excursus has been questioned. Prominent in raising doubts has been Walter Goffet, who argues that Jetka created an entirely mythical story of Gothic and other people's origins. Curta further argues that Jordanus had no real ethnographic knowledge of Scythia, despite claims that he himself was a Goth and was born in Thrace. He borrowed heavily from earlier historians, and only artificially linked the 6th century Sclaveni and Antes with the earlier Venethi, who had otherwise long disappeared by the 6th century. Whilst being anachronistic, he also employed a modernizing narrative strategy, whereby older events, the war between the Ostrogothic Vythomiris and the Alans, was retold as a war between Vinitharius and the contemporary Antes. In any case, no 4th century source mentions Antes, and the Ostrogoths only formed in the 5th century inside the Balkans. Apart from respect to older historians, Jordanus' narrative style was shaped by his polemical debate with his contemporary, Procopius. Whilst Jordanus linked the Sclaveni and Antes with the ancient Venedi, Procopius states that they were both once called Sporwa. Location. In 6th century, Jordanus and Procopius have been seen as invaluable sources in locating the Antes with greater precision. Jordanus states that they dwelt along the curve of the Black Sea, from the Dniester to the Dnieper. P. Barford questions whether this implies they occupied the steppe, or the regions further north, although most scholars generally envisage the Antes in the forest steppe zone of left bank Ukraine. In contrast, Procopius locates them just beyond the northern banks of the Danube. The lack of consistency and frank errors in the geography proves that neither author had anything more than vague geographic knowledge of Scythia. Of the old Antes Federation, the following tribes evolved on Ukrainian territory: Severans along the lower Desna and upper Simon Sula rivers, Polans between Kiev and Rodin, Drevlians between Pripyat and foreign rivers, Dulibis in Volhynia between the Vistula, Burn-style rivers, White Croats north of the Carpathian Mountains, Ulichians along the Keft bank of Bur River, Trivestians between Dniester and Prut rivers. 6th and 7th centuries. The first contact between the East Romans and the Antes was in 518 AD, recorded by Procopius. The Antean raid appeared to coincide with Vitalian revolt, but was intercepted and defeated by the Magister Militum per Thracium Germanus. Germanus was replaced by Chilbadius in the early 530s, who was killed 3 years later, during an expedition against the various Sclavenoi. With the death of Chilbadius, Justinian appears to have changed his policy against Slavic barbarians from attack to defense, exemplified by his grand program of refortification of garrisons along the Danube. Procopius notes that in 539 the Sclavines and Antes became hostile to one another and engaged in battle, probably encouraged by the Romans' traditional tactic of divide and conquer. At the same time, the Romans recruited mounted mercenaries from both groups to aid the war against the Ostrogoths. Nevertheless, both Procopius and Jordanus report numerous raids by Huns, Slavs, Bulgars and Antes in the years 539–40 AD, reporting that some 32 forts and 120,000 Roman prisoners were captured. Sometime between 533 and 545, the Antes invaded the Diocese of Thrace, enslaving many Romans and taking them north of the Danube to the Antean homelands. Indeed, there was numerous raids during this turbulent decade by numerous barbarians, including the Antes. Shortly after, the Antes became Roman allies and were given gold payments and a fort named Turris, somewhere north of the Danube, at a strategically important location, so as to prevent hostile barbarians invading Roman lands. This was part of a larger set of alliances, including the Lombards, so that pressure can be lifted off the lower Danube and forces can be diverted to Italy. Thus, in 545, the Antean soldiers were fighting in Lucania against Ostrogoths, and in the 580s they attacked the settlements of the Sclavines at the behest of the Romans. In 555 and 556, Dabrogeses led the Roman fleet in Crimea against Persian positions. The Antes remained Roman allies until the demise in the first decade of the 7th century. They were often involved in conflicts with the Avars, such as the war recorded by Menander the Guardsman in the 560s. Later, in retaliation for a Roman attack on the Sclavine allies, the Avars attacked the Antes in 602. The Avars sent their general Apsig to destroy the nation of the Antes. Despite numerous defections to the Romans during the campaign, the Avar attack appears to have ended the Antean polity. They never appear in sources apart from the epithet Anticus in the imperial titulature in 612. Goethe argues that the 602 attack on the Antes destroyed the political independence. However, the epithet Anticus is attested in imperial titulature until 612. Thus Cardarus rather argues that the disappearance of the Antes relates to general collapse of the Scythian, Lower Danubian limes which they defended, at which time their hegemony on the Lower Danube ended. Whatever the case, shortly after the collapse of the Danubian limes, the first evidence of Slavic settlement in northeastern Bulgaria begin to appear. The Pereshchapino hoard may be considered part of an Antean chieftain's treasury, dating to the early 7th century. Antae rulers. Boz, king of Antae and first known Slavic ruler, Dabrogeses, led Roman fleet in Crimea against Persian positions. Idris, father of Mesamir, powerful anti-archon. Gelagast, brother of Mesamir. Musokios, Antes monarch. Ardagast, commander and chieftain of Musokis, Pirogast,